Hi everyone. Today, on today's episode of Nostalgia Screams, we are talking about the Unseen Unheard Anthology. Today we're talking with Aubrey. Aubrey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great, and I'm so excited to get into this anthology. Was something I was really excited for. As someone who struggles with like tons of unseen disabilities, including epilepsy, it was really great to see anthology kind of dedicated to people who are often underrepresented in media. I've seen so many people fighting for characters like this to be seen, and it was great that there's finally an anthology that shows all of it together. So first off, before we get into the book, can you introduce yourself for our audience?
Yeah, I'm Aubrey Lynn Jeppson. I'm one of the co-editors on Unseen Unheard. I also have a story in the book, which is recently out of the norm for me. I usually stick to editing nowadays, but yeah, so I feel like this was kind of C.K. Carpenter's baby. Like they had this idea when we were working on Tales from the Cloakroom, and then they kind of brought in me and Anis Abdulhak, and so yeah, that's how we ended up here.
Awesome. So can you quick to our audience kind of give us the pitch for the book?
Yeah, so all of the editors deal with some kind of disability or neurodivergence. I personally am diagnosed ADHD and undiagnosed autistic, and then I do deal with some like stomach issues and stuff like that that like just make my life a lot different than a normal person's would be. And so we and CK Carpenter's been pretty open about the fact that they deal with fibromyalgia and how disabling that's been for them. And so they wanted to just give more people opportunities to tell their stories because like there are specific things that are it's hard to make comics no matter what, but it's harder if you're like disabled and collecting disability because you can only have so much money in the bank. Um, you might only have so much energy to devote towards those projects. It might be harder for you to finish those projects or stay consistent when you're writing things or things like that. So, I mean, it's different for each individual person, obviously, but that was the thought is like we need to represent the different things people deal with and let them tell their own stories.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And kind of, I like how you pointed out the specific note that it is hard to be a disabled comics creator, especially with, like you said, disability, but even just like being able to connect with other creators, like either in person or on the internet, both. I mean, it's already hard enough to connect with people as it is, but with disabilities, it's so much harder to connect. As someone who is ADHD and also undiagnosed autistic, it's very hard to like read people sometimes, and especially over the internet where it's all text and you're like trying to figure out if someone's being sarcastic or not. I know I recently had an interaction on Threads where someone misunderstood me and then I misunderstood them as I thought they were being sarcastic, and but I'm so excited. So how did this anthology, you mentioned that you and the other editors came up with this idea while you were working on Tales from the Cloakroom, but what's the whole process of how this came together since then?
Yeah, I think Chris mostly had or Chris is who is CK Carpenter. Sorry, CK Carpenter really had the idea, and then they brought in um, me and Ennis, and like that kind of like I knew they were working on it and that they wanted to do it, but I had said after Tales from the Cloakroom I probably needed a little bit of a break. Um, I've been in like neurodivergent burnout since 2020. I'm still working through that, and so I knew I couldn't go from one big anthology just to another. Um, and so I think that's why the timing is what it is now, which, and then we just kind of decided we wanted to do open submissions. We've noticed that, and there's nothing wrong with this, but we've noticed a lot of anthologies are kind of leaning towards more private invites, and we wanted to make sure we spread our net as far as we could, because we wanted to be able to offer those opportunities to people.
Mhm.
And so by opening submissions, we kind of were able to get like a lot of different kinds of submissions, a lot of different disabilities, different takes on neurodivergence. And so it was really good. The book actually worked out to being 12 stories, and it's divided right down the middle between disabilities and neurodivergence. Um, and obviously there's overlap between disability and neurodivergence. Like I'm the first to say that like probably mostly in the last 2 years, I've realized how much my neurodivergence is disabling and how much I struggle with it. And especially I'm almost 40, And like, I just don't have the energy I had in my 20s to like compensate for a lot of the things and a lot of the systems I used to build. I just don't have that energy anymore. And so, I don't know, it was just a good confluence of different things that came together. And I think we've got a really solid book because of it.
I'm again so excited for this book, and I think it's so right that it's just so hard to deal with this type of stuff. And again, with the open submissions, that was amazing because I remember I was so busy with senior year of college I couldn't apply, but I'm really glad you did that because I think with the private invite, that's not a bad thing if you have a certain intention, but especially with a book about disabilities, unless you know certain people have disabilities, because not everyone is as open with it. Not everyone's like tweeting or posting on Instagram about it. That it's like a very private thing to some people. That I think it's a really good idea that you did open submissions, and I'm excited that there's a balance between like a lot of representation. Even just looking at the cover of the book, which first of all, I love that it's basically a protest, and just the different like representations was just I feel so authentic, both like in all sorts of ways because you have tons of different genders and races represented across the spectrum of disabilities. As I especially love as someone who loves fidget toys and gets overwhelmed by loud noises. The one character is wearing like a sweatshirt, which is my comfort clothing, and has like sound headphones on, and it's just something. I mean, I work in a very loud space, so sometimes it does get overwhelming, but
Oh, yeah.
that felt so like relatable to me as someone who's been to numerous pride events and protests that it's like it does get overwhelming and you want to be part of these great changes, but sometimes it can be really overstimulating.
Yeah, I think that also speaks to like finding your community within the disability and neurodivergent communities because that's one thing that like knowing to have headphones and and a fidget in a tense situation. And this, I was telling my sister-in-law about how she deals with some of the sensory stuff that I do. Like I have a lot of sensory processing issues. I was telling her about loop earplugs. And if you are sensitive to sounds, loops are really nice because they don't like take the sound away. They just dull it down and you can still hear people talking. I took mine on vacation, and so when we were, traveling in noisy areas or my sister was playing music really loudly in the car and I knew it was going to overstimulate me, I threw those things in and it helped keep me closer to baseline. So I think that that's one thing that's nice about like books like this is it does bring people together, and sharing stories like this, like the story I just shared with you, it'll help people understand themselves and maybe help them like accommodate themselves or stand up for themselves in situations, advocate for themselves. I mean, we've already had to advocate for ourselves on Twitter because like we released the second cover. The one you're talking about is Al Acevedo's cover, which is awesome. It has the disability pride flag, a bunch of different people are represented, and like you said, the protest vibe to it. Our second cover, which is by sorry, I'm making sure I know the name, Arthur Cabezas, is like a fantasy cover with someone in a wheelchair, and we got pushback against that immediately, and there was the hashtag discourse on Twitter about having disabled people in fantasy settings. And so I think that gave us an opportunity to kind of be like, no, we're doing this thing, like we get to dream of ourselves in cool situations too. Like all of us want to see ourselves in things like the cool media we see. And so this is an opportunity for that. Like we've got some stories like that, some stories that are more educational or more slice of lifey. We kind of have everything across the board, which is really cool.
Yeah, and I really like the idea, especially with the fantasy cover that you guys did, was it wasn't like in a fantasy world a lot of people would be like, oh, we could use magic to fix these things, but there's oftentimes you're not fixing something, like it's something inherent to who someone is. And I really wanted to get in that fight when y'all were getting called out or getting pushback on Twitter, and it's just
Trolled.
like,
Yeah, grieved.
yeah, and it was very like, I think a lot of these people who aren't disabled or aren't in a neurodivergent space don't often understand like the perspective of.
Well, and I think that guy in particular was just, um, I had a way to say it that was really good, and then it fell out of my brain, which is my ADHD. I think that guy was just fighting. He wanted to fight with somebody because he
Mhm,
was saying things like we're Machiavellian and blah blah blah, and like anytime somebody like gave him a good reasonable point, he just moved the goalpost again. And I
mhm,
was saying, I've said this in other interviews, but like he specifically said he wouldn't want someone in a wheelchair in his Warhammer campaign. And it's so funny. I went to a con last weekend and there was a guy cosplaying Warhammer who was in a wheelchair. And to me that just like hit me right to the heart of like this is why this work's important is because exactly that. Like we don't need to necessarily change ourselves to see ourselves in those worlds. And I think if people really we've got so much stigma and perception around what disability and neurodivergence is, like telling our own stories helps shift that perception because I think a lot of people don't realize that like that stuff probably already is in your fantasy stories. You just aren't like reckoning with it. Like
mhm.
I haven't watched House of the Dragon, but I know there's a character who's lost an eye. That's a disabled character, you know? Like it is already there, but we do need more of it because we need more accurate representation too. There's a lot of shows out there that represent people that aren't like that either aren't written by people with those disabilities or neurodivergencies or they just aren't quite accurately representing those things.
Mhm.
And so I think having more people share their stories will shift the perception some.
Yeah, and no, I absolutely agree. I think even in like comics, which sometimes tends to show more than other media, like people being represented, I can barely think of any characters with disabilities or neurodivergencies that often aren't being like, oh, I fix this with a superpower. Like
Yeah.
you have so many characters who are like, um, I was in like a wheelchair or something, and now I got like a super Iron Man suit, and now it's all fixed. I do think one of my first disabled characters that I really encountered in comics, I'm gonna have to remember his name. He was part of the X-Men, and he was in a wheelchair. He wasn't Professor Xavier. It was another wheelchair-bound character, and he had like he was like a super genius, but he was able to do that as well as like control a robot, and it was just really cool to. I remember because I didn't have a comic he was in, but I remember flipping through the Marvel guidebook, and it was they actually chose a picture not of him in the like super robot suit, but like actually just him as himself, which I think has been great to show, and I think we need even more of it, which is why I'm so happy about this book. But you have 12 stories in here. Can you talk about? I know we're not going to get to all 12 of them, but can
Yeah.
you talk about a few of them?
Yeah. One of the ones I really jive with, and I want to make sure I say the person's name correctly because there are a lot of people in the book. I think we have almost 25 people in the book altogether. So it's Chuck Howat-Leese, and that story covers kind of like the sensory aspects of like autism, OCD, MDD, and some other stuff. And like, um, I don't know. I read that story and it depicts like kind of what it's like to have sensory overload and sensory shutdown. And I
Mm-hmm.
won't go into too much of it, but also like how that impacts a person's relationships. I just related really heavily to that. Like when I am in sensory overload, we think of comfort as someone hugging you, someone talking to you, someone loving on you. When I'm in sensory overload, all that's going to do is add to the fire that's burning, you know? And so
Mm-hmm.
um, I've been married for almost 14 years, and we've had to and to another autistic person, ironically enough. So like we've had to kind of go through, okay, when this happens, I need you to ask me how I'm feeling. And it was just cool to see kind of those aspects in a story and to see the difficulties that presents within a relationship and how someone kind of works through it because that's hard. It's really
Mm-hmm.
hard. Um, in the sampler, we sent out a three-story sampler, which I know you got. Um, Doug Wood's story in that is just like so good. And that's like not something I've ever dealt with. It's with traumatic brain injuries. Um, And like, I don't know. I think you can relate to things that, like, a lot of these stories are not disabilities that I myself deal with, but I can relate to the struggle. I can
Hmm.
have sympathy and empathy for what they're going through. And I think that that goes for anybody, really. Like, you'll read these stories and your heartstrings will be tugged, or you'll feel inspired or whatever. Like, there's a little bit of everything for everyone. There's a little bit of romance, a little bit of horror. So, like, if you want to find a book that has kind of a bunch of different stories with a bunch of different aspects in them, this is a great one for that.
See, I was really happy about that. Each that some of the stories explore different genres. I love slice of life, and I think it is so great for these type of stories. But I often love when we go into like horror, fantasy, and see like different types of genres represented, because then it sometimes the slice of life are great for making it relatable, because then you're like seeing someone going on that same journey. But with like horror, fantasy, it often helps being like, oh yeah, even these like fantastical characters are still going through the same things I go through.
Hmm.
And I think it just makes it so much better. I'm actually have Doug Wood's story pulled up, and it's so amazing, and the uh, the writing is just you feel the emotion. And I I followed Doug for a long time, and he's done such great work in the comic community with both Big Hype, Volume One and Volume Two. And I also love how Doug's story in this, like, it just everything he's written has gone better and better. And I love how this story is like a sci-fi story, where you know how it relates to his experience, but he's telling it in a like sci-fi way, which made it. I don't think fun's the right word, but it made it. You were able to see it through such a different perspective. And again, I'm gonna mispronounce the artist's name, but
I think it's Vinicius Carrero, but I'm not sure I did that right either. Um, if I'm remembering correctly.
yeah, their artwork is amazing. And
It is.
um, with Doug's with the artwork, where we really see the idea of like forgetting someone, and the way that's drawn in these like kind of white out like outlines, was so it was just that was one of my favorite stories out of the sampler pack that I got. And I'm just again so excited for everything in this, because you have such a great stack creative team. And again, all how was it as like how did you divide duties as three editors on this book?
Well, so that's another thing that's really great, when you're talking about disability and neurodivergency. We've all had to like step in and step out because
Hmm.
of dealing with various life things, energy levels, our own disabilities. Like, we've all had to kind of like, it's been very much like a what the race with the baton. I can't remember what those are called, but like where one person runs from one segment of the race and then one person runs the next segment of the race. I'm forgetting what that's called, but it's like that. We've all had to kind of take the baton and do various different pieces of the editing. And our fingerprints are all over this book, all three of us, for sure. Because it's been very equitable the way we've divided the labor, but it's also been equitable in the fact that, like, if someone is like, I am struggling, I need a couple days, we can go cool. Like, we'll run with it for a few days, um, or whatever, you know. And I think that that's how you have to do this. I knew I think I even mentioned it to CK early on. I knew that like we would need at least a third person, because I Tales from the Cloakroom was such a cool experience, but it did take a lot out of me, because like we did I approach comics editing the way like um where you are an editor from the start to the finish. You need to look at the scripts, you need to look at the roughs, you need to look at make sure the art's the right size, and then the lettering's the within the safe area and things like that. So I did the whole process on Tales from the Cloakroom, and so did CK, and we had some help from the other editors as well. Um, and then I did like our compiling, making our files for both digital and print, and it's a lot of work. And I'm forgetting things. I know I am. And so knowing that we had 3 people that were all willing to like throw the weight in together made that process so much easier, because I knew I didn't have to like white knuckle it and remember everything.
Mm-hmm.
I can keep track of what I need to keep track of, finish things that I need to finish, and if I need a little bit of grace, I can take that. And the same goes for our creators. Like we tried to make the deadlines once we fund not flexible, but give people enough run. Like we will be flexible, but what I'm saying is give people enough runway that like if something happens, they still have some time to finish. They still have some time to work on things, because it can be a lot. Like I've said this over and over again, but like especially now, the words ring truer than ever. If I don't take rest will take me. Like if I don't give my body time to rest and recover, and like sometimes that means sitting in a dark room for a couple hours if I've been around people too long or just social for too long, my body will decide that, you know what, we have to rest for 3 days now. You can't function now, you know? And for me, it's more of a brain thing for sure, because like I said, ADHD and autistic, but like that's been the beauty of this team, is that we can all help each other. And I think that's really important. And that's why we have 3 editors on this book, is because then we can all help each other and make this book the absolute best it can be.
Yeah, and I already think it's great. Can you talk about some of the rewards that you guys are going to be offering for this book? For those, I know you already have 325 or 324 backers as of tonight.
Yeah.
You're all chugging towards that goal.
We're moving along at a good clip. I'm optimistic.
Yeah.
So we have the digital copy plus the digital bundle, which is like over 300 pages of comics that are either written or edited by the editorial team. And so we've got books in there like Ethris. We've got books in there like Objects in the Mirror by and Kill Your Boyfriend, or Kill My Boyfriend, not your boyfriend, my boyfriend, by Enes Abdulhak. And then some books I've edited like Wardens, A Flag to Fly. We've got Tales from the Cloakroom in there. So just like Ari Gross is in the book, and he was kind enough to donate 2 of his comics that he's, you know, self-produced and funded on Kickstarter. And so that's a lot of like good books you're gonna get. That's one of them. We have 3 different covers. I mentioned the first 2 by Al Acevedo and Arthur Cabezas, and then our last cover is by Skylar Patridge, and it's a very ADHD cover. I love that cover. It like shows what my brain looks like at all times. I love it so much. The roughs came in for that cover, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's my brain. It was so validating. So you can get any of the 3 covers. And then we've also got bookmarks, which have the disability pride flag on one side, and then Skylar's cover on the other side. And then prints of each of the covers. And then, sorry, I keep saying and then. Another opportunity you can do is you can get drawn into the book. And we've got a few stories where we could probably insert some characters pretty easily. And so far, 3 of those have been purchased. It's $150, and that's all inclusive. So you get drawn into the book, you get a copy of the book, you get the PDF copy. Like, what more can you ask for?
Yeah.
And the other option you have is you can get editorial commissions from me or Enes. And like I said, you just heard a little bit about my editorial process. I think a good editor, their goal is always to make the book the best it can possibly be, and make sure that they're representing the writer's vision as good as they can be. So there's a lot of options there. If you are like me and you kind of have social challenges, and it's a little bit easier to have like it right out in front of you to purchase something, that's a great way to get an editor on your book. Like for me, I like seeing pricing up front. I like knowing what I'm getting into up front. So that'll make that social negotiation a little bit easier for some people. Yeah.
And as a writer, that's a great deal, because you've gotten to work on so many amazing books, and I mean, the talent shows, and I think people really need to, like, I think so many writers in the community need to look at options like these, because I know there are quite a few Kickstarters going on right now that I know you can either get like a custom commission, or like editorial or writing by someone on a creative team. And I think a lot of people need to take more advantage of this kind of stuff, because like it's not always that you're going to get a chance to do something like that. And again, editorial, I don't think as many people realize how much work editors do. As someone who's trying to get into editing, I cracked open Shelley Bond's book about editing, and like it makes you realize that it's not just looking at a script and doing grammar editing. Like there's so much work that goes into.
Yes, I love Shelley Bond so deeply. I've taken her Filth and Grammar Class 101 twice and her 102 once, and she has definitely hugely influenced who I am as an editor. And that's just it. She teaches you, she shows you both in, like if you are interested in writing comics, drawing comics, anything in comics, you should definitely pick up her book, Filth and Grammar. And then she has another one that I'm spacing on the name, but like any of her books on comic book editing are fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
They are a must read for anybody who's doing comics right now, because you really figure out like the different systems that go into comics creation and how changing colors in a scene can change the tone of a scene. Lettering placement can change the tone of a scene. There's so much that goes into this, like as a collaborative art form that it is. And so learning what a good editor is will help you too. You'll know who you want to work with. You'll know if their style of editing jives with your style of writing and creating, or, doing art. And so, yeah, I cannot recommend Filth and Grammar enough.
Yeah, and I actually got to talk to Shelley Bond as a Kickstarter reward for someone's book. She did a Zoom, and she's just, I really want to get, if she does that class again that you took, I really want to do that, because I think, like you even said, for anyone that does comics, it's helpful to learn what an editor can provide for you. Because I've talked to so many creators, and a lot of them are like, I don't need an editor for this. I use spell check, and it like is really helpful to teach them that it's like, no, I can help at every stage. Because I think even when I was starting out as a writer, I just thought that editors would like do grammar plus like story edits here and there, but you really see how much like they do, and I can tell you and the other two editors have done so much work on this book. And again, just going back to those rewards, like that comic bundle is over 300 pages, and you can get that for, at the lowest level of the comic bundle is $18, and that's like just tons and tons of comics. And then even with getting, like, if you want the physical copy of the book, you can also get that with the digital bundle as well for other tiers. And that's just a great deal. You're not only getting like a 64-page physical comic, you're also getting like over 300 pages of digital comics. And you can like take that anywhere. I know so many Kickstarters I've backed, I'll just pull them up on my phone on the way to work. And I mean, it's so much harder now with digital comics now that places like Comixology aren't as around. And I know Global Comics is now doing so much, which has been great. I actually just uploaded a book there the other day. But digital comics are, especially with tiers like this, where you can get indie creators books that you might not have known about otherwise, if because those apps are great, but it's sometimes hard to find like smaller creators books unless you like stumble upon it on Twitter or Instagram. But it's so great that there's so much in this, plus a lot of these digital books that you have so many creators that aren't even in Unseen and Unheard that people are going to now get exposed to. And I love everything. I've read most of these books that are actually in its digital collection. So
that's awesome.
Eleuthermania was the first book of Ennis's I read, and it's just so good. And then I have Objects in the Mirror in my room, and it's just such a good book. And Tales from the Cloakroom again was great, and I'm just so excited to see everyone's reaction to this, because it's just gonna be great. And there's also like great deals, like getting literally everything for $90. That's a really good deal. You get like all the covers, you get all the digital books. You get art. You get 3 different art prints, and you get the bookmark. And there's
Yeah.
just so much there. And I'm just again really excited for this. Did you have anything else that you wanted to promote with this book before we end today?
Um, you did touch on that like there on the cover there's a lot of races and like queer representation, and that is also reflected in some of the stories in the book, which I think is really cool. Like just that intersectionality is huge, and so I'm glad that that's in the book as well. But yeah, um I think I've covered most of it. Like just hearing it from the voice of the people who've experienced it, I think is really important. And so I think it's a cool book, and I hope people back it and support our work. If we're able to fund this one, we've talked about doing a volume 2, because they're like when we were doing the submission process, there were a few stories that like we were like, oh, if anybody drops out, we're bringing you in. And so we'd love to be able to do a few invite onlys from the submission process this first time for the next book. And we'd like to even broaden the representation. We did have someone reach out and be like, oh, I didn't see that like people who are deaf are related or like represented here. And I'm like, cool, well then maybe next book we can try to find representation for other disabilities or neurodivergencies that we weren't able to represent this time. So that's fingers crossed. Like I'd love to do a second volume and just get to continue to expand on this.
No, and I love that your intention is so great with it that you want to keep evolving this. And I'm really excited to see where this goes. And I think if you haven't backed it yet, our viewers need to go look at all the links to everyone's social media as well as the Kickstarter will be in the comments. And please go back it. There's, I think, 14 days left as of
Yep.
recording today. And
Yeah, it's the third, and we've got 14 days left. We're at about 10K. We need to get up to 13.5 to fully fund. We're getting close.
And there's so much great comics you're going to be able to get here. So go back that. And thank you all for listening to this episode of Nostalgic Screams. Of course, I can't speak. But thank you, Aubrey, for coming on. And everyone will see you in the next episode.
Thank you.